Hello, I'm Andrew Thompson in for Michael Serapio. We start tonight with new fundraising numbers for Canada's federal political parties. Conservatives again lead the way, raising more than $8.4 million last quarter. That's compared to $3.3 million for the Liberals and $1.3 million for the NDP between July and September. Now, as for 2024 as a whole, the Conservatives have now brought in $29 million. With the Liberals at $10.2 million and New Democrats near the $4 million mark. There have been calls from Liberals to spend more on party advertising and try and catch up with Conservatives. And today, Liberals are rolling out a new digital healthcare ad targeting Pierre Poilievre. Here's a portion.
Now they're rolling out dental care, and they're getting pharmacare done to deliver free contraceptives and diabetes medications. Pierre Poilievre has made it clear that he would make cuts to all these investments, removing healthcare services from millions of Canadians. Canadians need progress, not cuts. We won't go back.
All right, well, let's talk about that ad and more of this week's developments with our panel of political observers. Susan Smith is a former Liberal strategist, now principal and co-founder with Blue Sky Strategy Group. Cole Hogan is a Conservative digital strategist and principal at GT & Company. And George Soule is a former NDP Director of Communications, now principal at Syntax Strategic. Cole, I'm going to start with you as a digital ad expert. You saw that ad. There's been a lot of talk on Parliament Hill about when the Liberals might ramp up their advertising to try and catch up with what Conservatives have been doing. Do you think what we just saw here on healthcare and the Conservative leader is an effective message?
Well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate the Liberal Party for actually coming out with an ad 2 years later after Pierre Poilievre has become leader. It's interesting to watch that they focused on healthcare. When I look at the polling in terms of what party Canadians trust most to deal with healthcare, it's Conservatives and the NDP tied, and then the Liberals are right under them, but it's a pretty close race. So I understand the focus on healthcare, but I wonder if it's going to land in the same way. And, you know, like you mentioned, I do a lot of work on the digital ad campaign side. I follow the ad spends. And over the last 7 days in particular, the Conservatives have spent $80,000 and the Liberals have spent $4,500. Over the last 90 days, the Conservatives have spent almost $800,000 and the Liberals have spent about $80,000. So there's a wide gap there, and that gap continues. So it'll be interesting to see how much money they put behind this ad, because the amount that they spend will directly correlate with how much confidence they have in the message in this ad.
Susan, what do you think? Because look, we could still be nearly a year away from an election, but is it too little too late even now?
Well, I agree with Cole on some things and I disagree with him on others. Finally, they've got an ad. I said, and people have heard this many, many times, I said the night that Pierre Poilievre was elected that the Liberals needed to start an ad campaign against him. They didn't do it. So there is a big gap that they have to close. Finally, they're starting to close that gap. I do think it's smart to start with healthcare, as we see in the provincial elections that have been taking place. That is an important issue for Canadians, and the polling is continuing to show it. And what the Liberals are trying to remind Canadians is pharmacare, dental care, and other programs are connected to health. That you could put in a big health envelope, and that they are linked and have done things and delivered things with regards to that. It's up to 1 million people in the dental care program now. So I think it's a good place to start. They have to start talking about Poilievre in some way. They are late to the game. They definitely don't have the money that the Conservatives do, but they do have a good testing machine. So I think if they think it works, then you'll see the ad.
George, it is interesting, though, from the NDP perspective, because we are seeing, again, Liberals really focusing on a lot of the items that were in that NDP agreement, taking credit on things relating to healthcare, as Susan mentioned. What's your take on this?
Well, for sure. I mean, again, I'll repeat and agree that 1 million people today getting the dental care is huge. It means that people are actually feeling that and getting that benefit. So talking about how Pierre Poilievre is going to cut that, the more people who have it in a tangible way, that matters a lot. But I also think, like to Susan's point, you're right. Healthcare has been a big part of provincial campaigns, but it's been from the opposition. So it's all well and good for the Liberals to talk about healthcare right now, but I think by and large, taking pharmacare and dental care aside, by and large, people are concerned with the long lineups. They're concerned with how long it takes to get a surgery. They're not happy with the healthcare system they're seeing right now. So I found it strange that the Liberals are leading off this ad campaign to try to save their bacon by talking about healthcare, which is something that people are the most frustrated about.
Well, we know people are also frustrated a lot with housing and the cost of living, and we did see Susan, the Conservative leader, come out with another major plank of his housing plan this week, to removing the GST on new homes under $1 million. We heard the message come back from Liberals that this is just going to be cut to other housing programs, I should say, as Mr. Poilievre has talked about ending the Housing Accelerator Fund, for instance. So do you think that's going to be an effective strategy for Liberals, given that, look, Mr. Poilievre is talking about a tax cut, and Liberals are talking about what a lot of people see as just bureaucracy?
It's a good question. I would point all viewers to go have a look at some of Sean Fraser, who's the housing minister's exchanges with Pierre Poilievre in the House of Commons this week. Very entertaining. Mr. Poilievre's doing Mr. Poilievre, and Mr. Fraser is doing folksy Nova Scotia lawyer on his feet, and he's very, very funny. Mr. Poilievre, I think his idea is creative, cut the GST, but where Mr. Fraser is besting him is Poilievre is going to pay for this GST cut by cutting the Housing Accelerator Fund. And that's the fund that's actually getting houses built in municipalities. And as Mr. Fraser pointed out, that's what Mr. Poilievre's MPs have been writing to him and talking to him, saying, could you please bring the Housing Accelerator Fund to my community? The one tricky bit with Mr. Poilievre's announcement is he wants to take the GST off the final price, but not all the inputs that the builders have to make all the way along the way. So the only way the builders get that back is on the final sale. So I don't think it's actually going to make housing any cheaper for people. It's a bit of lipstick on something that doesn't really change anything.
Cole, I'll let you weigh in on this.
Sure, yeah. I looked to the opinion of Mike Moffat, the housing policy expert on this, and he said that it was not quite but almost perfect. He said that there was no other better policy put forward to date in terms of addressing accessibility to housing for middle-class Canadians. So I looked to that and I see, a pretty validating stakeholder there, endorsing the Conservative policy. I also look at where Canadians are at in terms of, the age demographic that is most concerned about housing, and that's millennials, 30 to 45, and millennials are, yes, in their 40s now. And as they look to buy a house, which looks impossible for all of us, we look towards any policy that'll make that a little bit easier. So I can see why Canadians trust Conservatives the most on housing above any other party, because Conservatives are the only party that's talking to young Canadians on the issues that they care about.
George, do you think that argument will have legs from the Conservative Party about we need to get rid of these programs, the Housing Accelerator Fund, Infrastructure Fund, instead really focus on the tax cut side of it?
Well, I do think it's a typical Conservative argument, right? Like, you know how to spend your money better than government does, and we're going to cut your taxes. And that's the problem for those of us who want to build real long-term solutions is that those are easy things to sell. And so I think it is a smart policy. And any time that Pierre Poilievre can quote a Liberal policy advisor, I'm sure that's fun for everyone. But I think that and I think back to the ad, I think that's one of the places the Liberals should be spending more time, is talking about where Pierre Poilievre is going to cut. And frankly, he's not denied anything, so why not accuse him of everything? Because he will. They're going to find places to cut. And cutting the GST off home sales is going to take a lot of money out of the revenue side, so they're going to find other places to cut. So these programs on housing will go, healthcare cuts will be real, but actually talk about those things more concretely, I think, is key.
Okay, there's been a lot of moving pieces on Parliament Hill this week. Questions about leadership, questions about confidence votes in the House of Commons. We have the Bloc saying, look, we're going to push to defeat the government now. The government did not meet our demands on pensions or on supply management. And then, George, we had the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, come out yesterday and say, look, we're not going to play games with the Bloc or the Conservatives. Even though we don't like the Liberal government, we're not going to let other opposition parties call the shots and have the Bloc help Conservatives make cuts, in his words. What do you think of that message from Mr. Singh and where it's positioning the NDP between the Conservatives and the Liberals?
Well, I think for sure what needs to happen is the NDP needs to find ways to push themselves a bit apart from the Liberals while also trying to get the programs through. We were talking about pharmacare and dental care, and I think in a very real way the NDP wants to get more than 1 million. They want 2 million, 5 million people on the dental care program. They want to see pharmacare get out there and people actually benefit from free birth control pills and diabetes medication. So they want to get those things out there. And I think that should be the message. Let's get this thing rolling. Right now, talking about the way that, sure, they don't want to let Poilievre or the Bloc direct them in any way or bullying them into a vote, but I think they also need to stand up and show some strength on their own.
Susan, what do you think about this, the positioning that we're seeing here with the NDP, the Bloc, and the Conservatives?
Well, if the question for people at home is, are we going to have an election really, really, really soon? The answer is no. Not a federal one. For those people who live in Ontario, are you going to have an Ontario election really, really, really soon? I think the answer is yes. So I think there are a number of moving parts and pieces. The NDP aren't ready to go, don't want to go yet, do want, I think, to try and expand some programs, but also recognize if we go right now, the polling numbers are what the polling numbers are, and the NDP will not have the same kind of impact that they do in a minority government. So they'll wait. The Bloc is in no hurry to go, I don't think either. No one wants an election before Christmas. I still think we're looking at a spring scenario. I still think we're looking at a Liberal government bringing in a budget in the spring that won't pass. That'll be the scenario that'll happen, because if Ford goes in June in Ontario, that's going to vacuum up a bunch of dollars, a bunch more volunteers that are also tired from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and BC provincial elections. So there's actually the federal provincial dance is a very interesting one to watch too, and that will also have impact on the timing of a potential federal election.
Mm-hmm. Cole, talk about this timing that Susan mentions, because from the Conservative perspective, and we hear it in question period, why not call a carbon tax election? Why not call a carbon tax election? How do Conservatives keep the momentum that they're clearly seeing in the polls going forward when really they can't necessarily control the timing of an election right now?
Yeah, I think the Conservatives will continue to press the Liberals and the NDP. And I look at Jagmeet Singh and he says, well, I won't play their political games. Well, that's interesting, because you made a big show of ripping up the confidence and supply agreement, then to only vote confidence in the Trudeau Liberals again. So I think every time he does that, that erodes his credibility, and the Conservatives will point to that as proof of that. And I think Canadians, I should say, have a problem taking things seriously right now, especially with this in particular. And I think, after the next election, Pierre Poilievre will be Prime Minister, and Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh will no longer be the leaders of their respective parties.
All right, we will see. We have to leave it there. Cole Hogan, Susan Smith, and George Soule, thank you.